going to start off with some questions here. First, would you like to introduce yourself and tell people where we are today?
My name is Ellen Riedel.
I'm Guy Riedel, and we're in Ellis, Kansas at Dolce Vita. It's a wedding venue, an event venue that we bought a few years ago and remodeled. And it was an older building that was dilapidated that we kind of brought back to life.
Great. So we heard your story on KWCH in Wichita, and we were listening to your testimony that you took to the legislature about your property taxes. But before we talk about that part of your story, I wanted to talk about starting a small business. I'm a small business owner too, and I know that starting that business is for labor and love, and it often takes a major leap of faith, particularly for a venue this size. So can you tell us about you and your husband's leap of faith that you made?
So it really started off just with a vision of this building, right?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even know we were going to turn it into a venue. We just knew that after 10 years of driving by it, that it needed to be either demolished or brought back to life. And it had great bones. I mean, I looked at the building. We had actually thought about making an offer on it before, and I had walked through it and checked the foundations and things, and I was really pleased with what was here. But it had been sitting vacant for 20 years, and there was some major issues as well. I mean, it was stripped and gutted clean. There was nothing in here. So we were starting fresh with a shell, but the shell was in decent shape. So when we purchased it, I thought, let's just take it to a point where we can get it looking nice again, and maybe we'll just turn it. And then throughout the process, I just kind of had an epiphany that I thought this venue would really take off here in a small community, and it's done great.
So you testified that right after you bought the property, the sales tax or the property tax was about
They're about $3,500, like 28 cents.
and then this last time you had to pay property tax, it was
The next year it was $20,810 and some odd cents.
yeah, just incredible. So you put all this work in, you made this major investment to change the town's outlook, and then you get that tax bill in the mail. So what was your reaction?
I was infuriated. I was so mad I wanted to puke.
I knew it was going to go up, but I had no clue that we were going to see that kind of a jump. And I mean, I know it's a lot of square footage, but it's really tough to make a business work in a small community. And I felt like we were just being punished for cleaning the community up and taking an old building that was an eyesore and bringing it back to life. And it was hard. It was a kick in the teeth, but
So most people are surprised when I tell them that last year the individual tax burden in Kansas was only 1% lower than California. So what's your reaction to that?
It gives me goosebumps to hear that we're being compared to California in such a way.
Yeah,
not
And not in a good way. Not in a good way. Like, just, I can't
you can
believe
see people fleeing, especially businesses from the state of California and moving, look at Elon Musk moving to Texas. There's a lot of other examples, but it's because of the taxes that they are not staying in those areas. And Kansas is becoming one of those states. And unless legislation realizes it, makes some changes, we're all in trouble. I mean, people are going to start fleeing this state as well.
some people say they already are.
I'm sure.
So you shared your story by testifying to legislators, speaking of legislators in Topeka, and you maybe opened some eyes, but there were some politicians who still weren't persuaded. So what do you think they need to know? What would open their eyes?
I've thought of that, and I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around why they're not getting it. So that's a very good question. I would be very open-minded for any of them to reach out if they have additional questions. I would be happy to answer them and try to work with them. Having said that, I often wonder if there might be other reasons that they're not coming around, maybe financially. Are people being incentivized not to see this point of view? I don't know.
I look at it like it's got to hit home, for those that are in power. Um, it's easy to kick the can down the road and, stick with the status quo and hope that you get reelected and just not buck the system. This is a huge issue for Kansas. And I think it's going to take several of them to see something really major in their own personal lives to change their minds. Maybe it's their mother that's getting evicted and kicked out on the street because they couldn't pay their taxes, or a friend's mother or something, where they see something right in their circle. And maybe it's going to take something like that because it seems, as she said, that I think there's too many that get into power and they're afraid to relinquish that power because of a decision they made, so they won't make the hard decisions.
So maybe a lack of courage.
Yeah.
Potentially. Well, so you started this journey, you're optimistic about Ellis, you're optimistic about Kansas, and I don't want to lose sight of that because we need that optimism in Kansas. So are you optimistic that we can make the changes we need and see a Kansas come back?
I want to say yes, because if you look at the numbers, there are 80, I think it was like 84% of Kansas voters had an increase of a minimum of 25% property tax valuations between 2021 and 2024. So I think most Kansas voters, if presented with an opportunity to vote on something like this, would change the legislation. So if put in the hands of the voters, yes. If left to legislators, I don't know.
Carol, I'm going to ask you a question about listening to so you listened to the testimony that she gave, and then you listened to the questions. Was there any of the questions that your wife got that sort of bothered you?
Well, there was a comment about the bulging balloon that really got to me, and I just
that comment was, if we change property tax, how can we change sales tax? And
right. If we squeeze the balloon here, it's going to just blow up over here. We've got to find the money somewhere. Well, maybe we don't. Kansans have had to tighten our belts for the last 30 or 40 years as government's blown up and gone out of control. So my point is, why doesn't government tighten their belts for a change? We won't get a bulge over here if we tighten our belts in government. So when we squeeze over here, if we've already tightened some of these things up, we'll be fine. But instead, they continue to spend out of control, and there's no end in sight. And, it goes to, for instance, there was a county budget that I heard about. This has been a couple, maybe 3 years ago. And there was somebody saying that, well, if we don't spend this much, we won't get it again next year. So they just went out and bought things that they didn't need. Now, that's not how you spend money. You're in business. I'm in business. If I spent money like that, I would be broke. But as a, legislator or a government entity, they just increase our taxes, and it's got to stop somewhere.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks to both of you for taking the time to share your story today and let us see your beautiful venue here in Ellis, Kansas. And I can highly recommend it for anyone looking for a wedding or an event. But this is the first of many stories that we want our Kansans to hear, and our legislators and our political elected officials to hear, because we want to put a face to the issue that we're hearing all over Kansas. The property taxes are out of control and the tax system just doesn't work because our spending is too high. So if you have a story like this, we'd love for you to share it with us. We're going to have a email address in this post, and send your story, and maybe you'll be in our next video. Thanks.